Hi folks, with Tassus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about attempts throughout history of what today we would call affirmative action, diversity and inclusion and all that sort of stuff. It's not new, it's been around for a long time. Mostly it was where in the case of an empire, there was an attempt to integrate the native population with the government or the governing class. So there was an effort to do that, and we see examples of that in say India with the British in the 1880s and 1890s, and quite an earnest attempt it was as well. Also the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which included Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Ruthenians, Croats, Bosnians. It was quite a hodgepodge in what was sort of central southern Europe, really, before 1918. And it had sort of been built around the nucleus of German Austrians, and in the Germanic languages they called that the Eastern Reich, or Österreich in German. So they were, how do we integrate and how do we sort of organise this affirmative action, or do we use affirmative action to integrate and assimilate these disparate populations? So again, a very earnest attempt. But did it work? Now, the other area where you'd see attempts at, and even the Romans or the ancient Egyptians tried this, is where you import a large workforce, whether as a sort of indentured, long-term indentured, which is kind of semi-slavery, or slaves in the sense that you buy them or own them for a period of time at least. So there was an attempt at integration and through affirmative action again there. So let's have a look at historical, because really affirmative action today is making, as far as I can tell, exactly the same mistakes that we've made throughout history. And the intentions are probably less sincere today than they were back 100, 150 years ago. So let's sort of have a look at the situation. Now we're looking at India, and this is primarily northern India, which takes this area of India at the time. Remember, India was not a nation. When the British or the Europeans turned up, India was not a nation. It was a hodgepodge of a gazillion little tiny petty principalities and fiefdoms and so on. There were some larger areas in there, but it was again 100 plus little petty principalities there. So this idea that India was a nation at the time, there were multiple languages, dialects that were so different that A couldn't understand B, and so on. So it was really the British that brought that whole subcontinent together in terms of India, at least, or even Pakistan for that matter, as a nation. But going back to sort of the 1880s, 1890s, around there, the British were looking at the northern India, which is today would be more Bangladesh, parts of Nepal, eastern Afghanistan, and northern India. So it's that area around there. And they'd noticed that there was constant blood feuds between tribes and family units within tribes that would often break out into open warfare. Now, what made it a little bit different in this area, there were a lot of narrow sort of passes through the mountains and narrow trails, and you kind of had to, that was the only way through. So when there was any sort of conflict in the area, it shut everything down. All commerce, everything stopped. And to the British, if anything, were quite a high-powered trading nation, they didn't like this idea of this constant disruption to business and to commerce. So they thought, well, how can we stop this? How can we deal with it? How can we stop these people from constantly going to war? And there were bandits on the streets that would murder people, or on the passes, the trails would murdering people. So it was an area of constant drama and unrest, and again these blood feuds that went on. So the British thought, well, how can we stop this? How can we start to prevent this? And so they hit upon at the time, well, let's engage in affirmative action. Let's make the local Indians part of the government and part of the governing class, part of the administrative class, part of the culture, part of the value system. So we'll integrate them along that. So that was trying to bring the Indians into the European way of doing things, or the people in that part of India at least, which was generically or in its widest and called India, even though it would break out into, again, Afghanistan and Pakistan and Bangladesh and all that sort of stuff. So they thought about, okay, how will we do this? I know, says some bright spark. What we'll do is we'll create all these jobs and we'll designate these jobs to be only for Indians or only for the locals. And we'll make them well-paying jobs. And that will bring them in as being part of our culture and part of the system, part of the process and all that sort of thing. So they thought they'll do that. But then they found that, the Indians would flunk the entry exams that white people had to pass. So they dispensed with the exams. Okay, well, let's either lower the bar so that no Indian can fail, or we'll dispense with the exams altogether. Now, this of course failed because they had to work alongside the white people. Merit still existed, so they could give you the job, but you still had to do it. You still had to be effective in the job. So the affirmative action back in the day, they dropped the merit for getting the job, but the merit, once you got the job, you still had to do it. The merit part stayed for that, or at least for the time being. So they dropped the exams and gifted the Indians the jobs. Now, there are a few things in terms of local sensibilities and local sort of, tribal family politics, is that the people, the families, the upper class families who had prestige, they believed their children, for example, were entitled to these jobs as a sign of their prestige. Now, the idea for these people at the upper caste, the Brahmins and so on, the idea that you would actually work for a living was unthinkable. We're a socially prestigious demigod class. We don't do any fucking work. The peasants do the work. We take the money from the peasants and then live like kings and look all godlike and regal and so on. So the idea that you get the job and do work, that was foreign to them. So the British then had to go, well, let's go to the next class down, sort of the merchant type class, people that are kind of used to doing, at least some work. But again, the sense of entitlement was there. So when these people were given the jobs, they were, the local people were given the jobs, they would, their performance was terrible. And so they had to be sort of moved to one side. This then meant they had honorary jobs, which were a title and an office to sit in, something that they could go around and boast to their buddies, say, hey, look, I'm the deputy assistant commissioner for such and such, that sort of thing. So bragging rights type jobs rather than actual jobs. But they had to be paid, so it looked like they were part of the show while the white people still did the work. So this kind of didn't work. It got a lot of resentment from the white people, and said, well, why are they being given jobs and paid the same as me? So then the white people had to be paid more and then that created, well, I'm an upper class Indian guy and this lower middle class white boy, why am I on equal footing with him? I'm in fucking charge here, and I'm the important one. I'm the upper class dude. So these were part of the problems with affirmative action, that when they applied any form of merit, then the locals couldn't cut it. So they had to remove merit in order to make affirmative action on an outcome basis successful. So, and they did the same thing. They had targets. Well, let's hire 100 Indians, or have many, 100 Indians into the railway service, as an example, or the postal service, whatever it might be. And that would be the target. So they'd set about the target just so they could produce the outcome and say, okay, we've solved the social integration problem, or the assimilation problem. We've hired 100 Indians to sit around and do nothing and get paid for it. So it wasn't solving the problem. They weren't changing attitudes or views. They probably did in some cases, but not enough to make the difference. But it's the way they approached it. Now, they also tried other things, like effectively gifting scholarships to prominent Indian families so that their sons would go to, say, London to receive a Western education. And this is the British found this with the blacks in Africa. These people would go and do the British education or the European education, and then come back to Africa and just be as tribal and just be as corrupt as before. There was no difference. They weren't acquiring an attitude of public service or an attitude of improving the lives of their fellow citizens, or these. It was still very corrupt. Very much, you give your family all the key jobs, and you rip off the peasants and so on. So they never acquired these other traditional European or certainly British attitudes that they were attempting to inculcate in them. So the bottom line was it failed. It didn't succeed. It didn't even come close to succeeding. But they were making the same the same idea of how do we integrate these two different cultures and populations and so on. I know, let's do affirmative action. And so that let's just set aside, let's just make sure there are jobs reserved only for non-white people, and that will achieve. But of course, it didn't achieve it. It didn't even come close. Now, again, I'm sure there's not one or two cases where you go, okay, well, it kind of worked there. But the instances were extremely rare. And so you could say it was a colossal failure all around, even though the intention was the same. But if you look at the writings of the local British politicians and other people, administrators in the locally British run government, they were talking and expressing a lot of the views and the justifications and the reasoning that we see today in affirmative action. Of course, it's not working today for the same reasons it didn't work then. In order to get the competent people, you have to have rigorous entrance requirements and then equally rigorous performance reviews. But they found as soon as they did that to the locals, then they couldn't hire them, or they couldn't keep them, or both. So they thought, well, the only way we can get this affirmative action outcome is to do away with merit entirely and just rely on say, giving community leaders or giving the children of tribal chieftains the jobs, just so we can keep in suite with the influences, if you like, in the area. They ended up doing that, which caused a degradation because these people felt they were entitled to the jobs and felt they were entitled to the riches, and also very corrupt. So whenever you gave them any sort of position of power, they would instantly engage in large-scale corruption, and so again defeating the purpose of the integration. Then they'd have to get rid of them. Then the local village chieftain would get upset because, hey, why did you fire my son just because he was ripping off the system? Who cares? He's a demigod. He's allowed to. And they had no concept that corruption is wrong or it shouldn't be done, or the railways or the postal service is there for the common benefit. This was something that they just couldn't get into their heads. And if you've got a position of power, why wouldn't you engage in corruption? To not engage in corrupt practices when you have the power to do so is madness in their cognizance. So affirmative action failed comprehensively there. Coming to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they did a slightly different variation, but really not much more. Because they had so many different sub-races, and again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there was the core of it was German Austrians, and then Hungarians and Czechs and Slovaks and Ruthenians and Bosnians and so on and so forth. So there were numerous sort of little micro-nationalities in there. A lot of them, or some of them, from the Balkans, and groups that kind of didn't, the groups didn't really get on so well, Bosnian Serbs and the whole thing. So the Austrians didn't. Again, it's probably a commercial and administrative. Well, not probably was. It was a commercial and administrative issue. How can we get peaceful coexistence? We don't need the constant warfare, the aggravation, the murders, the assassinations. Tribes and clans and families having blood feuds and trying to fucking kill each other all the time. It's bad for business. It's bad for government. It's bad for administration. It's just no good all around. How do we stop this I know, let's have an assimilation program. How do we do that? Hey, affirmative action is the way to go. So they would do so. Again, they would create sort of jobs that had no merit either to get them or to keep them, and this became then a huge sort of dead weight on the empire, and caused people, instead of people assimilate or integrating, it just people came away with a sense of entitlement. Well, why can't I get that sort of gift job where I need to do nothing but get paid a lot of money? I want that. Why should I bust my ass for ordinary money when this dude's sitting around doing fuck all and getting well paid? So this idea of affirmative action, so they would give jobs in university, they would create universities or colleges, and they would hand out jobs to just local idiots and parasites and so on, give them jobs. They would create all these bureaucratic entities, endless bureaucratic entities were created, and then they would give these plum, well-paid, prestigious sounding jobs to people who again were influencers. So they were effectively buying off, if you like, the local town or village with vast handouts. Now, this made the administration and government hugely expensive and, of course, inefficient, ineffective. These people weren't becoming more Austro-Hungarian. They weren't committing to the principle of the empire at all. They were just thinking, I'll take what I can get. These idiots want to hand out, give me a job I'm not qualified for and pay me well for it. Well, why not? So instead of creating through affirmative action, instead of creating an integrated or assimilated class of people, it created a parasite class. And the parasite class had more and more demands for handouts. So their appetite for handouts, gimme, their appetite increased exponentially, whilst their commitment to the empire and its principles and its goals, objectives, I don't give a shit about these guys, because as long as they're giving me money and handing stuff out, I'm good to go. So this became so when things like wars broke out and the like, the Austro-Hungarian armed forces, which were very multinational, the Czechs were thinking, well, why the fuck should I fight for these guys? People in Ruthenia thought, well, I should be in with Poland here. Our area should be part of Poland. Why the fuck do I care about these guys? And the Bosnians, well, I'm a Slav. Why do I give a fuck about those Austro-Germans and so on? So there was no cohesion in any sense, other than through handouts and again these affirmative action programs, which comprehensively failed for the same reasons they fail today. In order to get the the appearance, this fantastic vision of a supposed nirvana of everybody playing harps and holding hands and singing Kumbaya and all that. Such a vision, such a place doesn't even exist. But the idea you can get there by creating a parasite class through non-meritorious handing out of goodies and gifts and so on, it just doesn't work. It didn't achieve it then, it doesn't achieve it now. And if you look at the Roman attempts, it does the same sort of thing. Affirmative action, jobs in the armed forces, the administration, tax collecting, government, you name it. The Romans really went hard on that. And you can almost plot the decline of the Roman Empire from the time they engaged in these vigorous affirmative action programs. And you can see the sense in everything. Well, how can we integrate all these tribes that are all around us and in the periphery of the Roman Empire and this sort of thing? How can we get them to share our Roman values and attitudes to courts of law and administration that's not corrupt and these sort of things? And of course you can't. But even if you could, you can't do it through affirmative action, which is what the Romans did, what the British tried in India that failed, what the Austro-Hungarians tried, and so on. So as we look at affirmative action today, it's going down the same path and making the same mistakes as we're importing in the West vast numbers of people from other cultures and gifting them jobs. Just giving it. Hey, you don't have to know anything about, just gifting them the jobs. And I'm going to do another video about this sort of soon, but I went to a meeting recently where one of the women, a brown woman in the executive suite, who sounded like she knew nothing about the thing. Had a couple of sort of talking points she kept on blurting out, but and I thought, how could somebody, and this is before I knew anything about it, I thought, how could somebody that unqualified be sitting at the executive table? It's just insane. And so it wasn't hard to go online and find find her CV. And her job 3 months before had been a part-time fucking barista. That's the only job she'd ever had. And suddenly she's in this multinational company and has been elevated to the executive suite. Now, it's all part of the affirmative action program, and I get it. But this is, again, we're making the same mistakes. I don't care if the person is brown and female. I don't give a shit, provided they know what they're doing and they're competent at their job. But what it means when they put her in this job is they've stopped a competent white person from getting the job. And that is unacceptable. That costs all of us a lot, including the brown woman who's got the job, because the economy, the wider economy, is going to be less able to produce jobs as time goes on because of these stupid, destructive, parasitic affirmative action policies. It's interesting how we don't learn from history. We don't learn from the past because the lessons that affirmative action fails, unless it's strictly meritorious, in which case you can't have affirmative action, then those examples of its failure in the past have simply not been learned. You've been with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.